I can't drive this home enough. We are self-healing, self-organizing, self-regenerating, self-reorganizing. There's so much innate wisdom within us that we don't realize. We're so busy with our social media and our television and the news, or our work or our social life, or whatever distractions we have. Our culture is like, I don't know that I've been in other cultures, and we are so distracted here from ourselves, from in here. We actually regenerate new cells. Our whole body regenerates new cells, minus the bone, which can take up to 2 years. But in about 7 to 9 months, we are different cellularly. So we have the potential to step up into new cells, into functioning at a higher level. We have that potential. So working with the emotional piece, working with the mental piece, the programming is all part of that. And laying new neural grooves, new neural tracks with deeper neural grooves to anchor in new habit patterns that work for us. What governs all this? 18 days after mom and dad come together and have their honeymoon night, 2 cells become 4, become 8, become 16, become 32, 64, and on. And at 18 days after conception, our primitive nervous system, brain and spinal cord, are formed. The primitive nervous system. 18 days after conception. When I found that out in chiropractic school, I was blown away. We don't even know we're pregnant, us moms, when we don't even know we're pregnant at 18 days. Right? 18 days. And from there, that primitive nervous system starts the whole process of organizing that us into a baby. 18 days, nervous system. Your nervous system, your brain, which is protected in the skull, and your spinal cord, which is protected in the spine, is made up of strings, like guitar strings, piano strings. So picture that as like the cable coming through you. From the brain stem, the lower part of the brain, all the way down. What's really interesting is that children that are 1.5 to 2, that's their brain stem prior to that is down into the first 2 vertebrae in the neck. So part of their brain exits down, bless you, into those first 2 vertebrae. As they reach 2 and older, it retracts up into the brain, right around 2 years of age. 1.5 to 2 years. You know how much falling and trauma we go through with that big head on that little body? It's pretty amazing. Our bodies are amazing. And that spinal cord that runs all the way through, and all these nerves that come out it, if we were to take away, and I used to say this to the kids in my practice in Colorado, if we were to take away your skin and your organs and your bones and your muscles, and all you were your nervous system, you'd be like an electrical light show. And they would look at me and go, "That's disgusting." They're so cute. But your nervous system, your spinal cord is like strings. Anybody play string instrument? Nice. So when we were little, we played piano, not very well, but I attempted it. And we had the tuner man come and tune the piano strings, because there needed to be a normal state of tone and tension in those guitar strings and that piano string. Too much tension, the music sounded off. Not enough tension, same thing. So that tone and tension is really important. Same thing with the spinal cord. There's a normal state of tone and tension that needs to be there. I've never seen anyone with not enough tension, but too much tension will definitely drive the nervous system. When we elongate nerves, stretch nerves, we're interfering with the electrical potential that runs through them. There's also an electromagnetic energy, and there's what D.D. Palmer and B.J. Palmer back in the early days called a mental impulse. Impulse is the consciousness that runs through with our nervous system. These guys were like really tapped in. So what I love is that in India, they call the first vertebrae that holds the head up the atlas. It holds the weight of the world, our head. And that atlas, is like a ring. The spinal cord goes right through it. And they call that the mouth of God in India. Because to them, everything comes through from above down. Now, in our physical reality, we would say above down was the brain. But above down being source, whatever word you put for source. That comes down through us. And Yogananda, any yoga people here? Okay, good. I figured we're in Sedona. Yogananda, who in the early 1920s, I believe he was the first yogi to come from India here, had a huge following. He said in his movie Awake and in his book, Autobiography of a Yogi, that the spinal canal, that column, is the conduit for spiritual experiences, spiritual healing, consciousness, awakening, spiritual awakening. I'm paraphrasing. So that big,
say that again?
the spinal cord is the conduit for spiritual awakening and spiritual experiences. So that tone and tension is critical, not just for our physical health, but our mental, emotional health, and our conduit for spiritual awakening. There is a certain frequency and tone that the spinal cord projects out. And Dr. Donald Epstein, again, the originator of network care, actually can hear tones. So when we talk about certain patterns in the neurology, he can look at the audience and pick out, depending on what he wants to demonstrate, who's got the tone that he wants to work on based on what their nervous system is doing. It's phenomenal. I'm not quite there yet. Soon. But that music, that frequency, that vibration in the central canal, in yoga we call it that central canal, that is where, you remember the movie Law of Attraction or The Secret? Where you draw and attract from is that core of you. There's a resonance, a tone, a frequency, a vibration that you attract from and to. And as we change that frequency and reorganize, and I'll say upgrade with no judgment, your life starts to attract different experiences in people and anything else that resonates with you. And people saw that a lot in their care, that their life would start to reorganize. So, jumping the gun. So let's look at the spinal cord for a minute. Spinal cord, all these nerves go to every cell of the body. Every tiny, even like the tip of your nose, tip of your finger, every little liver cell, kidney cell, every cell. If there's tension at the central canal in the spinal cord, there's tension on the nerves, and it could be a particular nerve that goes to a particular organ, usually is. And that tension on the nerves is going to create tension on the cell membrane. That cell membrane is the cell of, say, a liver cell. Now, if anybody's ever read Candace Pert's work, Molecules of Emotion, it's a fabulous book, and she talks about spinal cord tension, and the cell membrane holds our receptor sites for a lot of things, one being emotion, on every cell that we have in our body. So if the cell membrane has the same occupied space for love and anger, which it does, the same receptor site on your cells, on all your cells, love and anger, occupy the same space. If there's tension on the system, you're more likely to feel anger and not love. If that tension is released, you're more likely to feel love than anger. But what's interesting is that you can't feel them both at the same time. Remember when our parents were mad at us and they'd say, I love you and I'm angry with you? They could think that, but they didn't feel it. That's a really good book for more information on that. Molecules of Emotion, Candace Pert, P-E-R-T. She loves network care too. It's really cool to have her support. So when we have tension on the neurology, we go into what we call a defense physiology. And a lot of times you'll see it in people. It'll look like this, where there's kind of a rib cage, shoulders are high. I'm exaggerating, sometimes you can't tell, but on a significant defense physiology, there's a roundedness in the mid-spine, the head comes forward. It's like you're ready, you're on. You're ready for whatever's coming at you. Sympathetic, parasympathetic. Those two aspects of our nervous system pretty much control all of our organ systems, our mind, all of it, as well as the higher brain. When we're in defense physiology, we are in sympathetic overload or sympathetic system, meaning that we're in fight or flight or freeze. Sometimes we don't run or fight, we just lock into it, which a lot of us do here. I'm talking collectively, not in here. That fight or flight or freeze, that sympathetic system creates that defense physiology. Now, sympathetic system is your go, 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 do, 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 constant movement, constant thought, you're on. Your parasympathetic system is your slowing the breath, heart rate, pulse, your digestion, the energy in the room just shifted, slowing down, okay, sleeping at night. When we're in sympathetic, those activities don't fully function. What's really interesting is a lot of our, and I'm going to generalize here, in our nervous system, our parasympathetic is up high in the spine and down low in the sacrum, and our sympathetic is through the mid-spine and part of the lumbar spine. Now there are threads, I'm kind of generalizing here. So it's not uncommon that I find most people have misalignment or subluxation, distortion patterns in their upper neck, as well as their upper thoracics, especially when the head's coming forward, which means that the sympathetic and parasympathetic aren't quite communicating. And if we've had, which we'll talk about, trauma, we're more in sympathetic than parasympathetic. And so we're dysregulated, if I can use that word, and that we have a whole culture of people who just don't sleep well, right? And sleeping is when we rest and restore and repair. It is critical. People who don't sleep have a lot more health problems and emotional problems. Cortisol levels, the whole chemistry of the body is altered. All right. The other thing, too, that happens with the sympathetic system, and when somebody is in chronic pain, is that the frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex, it's your thinking brain, it's your rationalization, your understanding, it gets thinner and smaller. So children that are highly traumatized, they act like a 5-year-old, like let's just say a 12-year-old. I worked at a residential treatment center for a while in Colorado. And those kids that were like 10, 11, 12 acted like 3- and 4-year-olds because they were so highly traumatized. Their stories were horrendous. I couldn't even read them after a while. But their frontal lobes were so contracted and thinned, they couldn't even read because of that trauma and ongoing. So to a lesser degree, someone who lives in chronic pain, they've done low back pain studies, and the scans show that the frontal lobe is contracted. And people who live in pain, long-term pain, chronic pain, have a harder time making healthy decisions because of that. As we start to unwind the tension in the nervous system and bring peace into the system, We get more respiration. We get the parasympathetic on board. The frontal lobe starts to thicken and relax and get bigger. It does repair. And we can start feeling our bodies functioning better. We can sleep a little bit better. And over a period of time, we can really start to release the old trauma that has created that in the first place. It doesn't mean the trauma hasn't happened, but our perception of the trauma can soften. And perception of anything seems to be what drives a lot of our stress. You and I can have the same experience. 5 of us can have the same experience, and we'll have 5 different interpretations of what happened, from not a big deal to, oh my gosh, that was like death. And it has to do with our neurology and our interpretation and the meaning we give that story. But as we give that story meaning and we embed that into the neurology, it drives us. So what the body's doing in essence is it's downsizing its use of energy so we can survive when we're in sympathetic mode. So that parasympathetic is huge. All right. So what are the things that create stress and tension and distortion in our system? Physical trauma, I call it the 3 T's. Traumas. So it could be falls and injuries and car accidents and the usual things like that. Could also be sitting in front of the computer for hours. Could also be carrying the purse on the shoulder for 50 years, the baby on the hip. Any habit pattern creates, again, neural grooves. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse is all trauma I would put in that category. Your thoughts. What we say to ourselves as a culture, not all of us, but a lot of us, we would never even say to someone we didn't like. The chatter in our minds is so suppressive, nasty at times, inhibiting, that when that again is a neural pattern in the system, it goes. For people that grew up in very critical, judgmental homes, and then we leave that home and we do life, we don't take our parents with us, but in essence we do, because we become that parent inside. And so we keep that critical parent or critical mind hammering on us constantly. And when we start to listen to the words in there, it's amazing. I mean, when I started to listen to what I was saying to myself in there at any given moment of the day, I was shocked. And it goes on. And if you can stop and slow down enough to catch that and reframe it and change a habit pattern, it's huge. Huge. As we clear certain patterns in the nervous system with network care, there's a specific pattern, we call it a phase 4, that is very much related to that mind going. And when that pattern breaks loose, it's like shh in there. It's quieter. And we can catch those moments when we need to reframe what we're saying in here. The other T is chemicals. The air, cars, food, ongoing. Our new house, our new clothes. We live in a chemical world. I was listening to Satguru, who's a mystic yogi who teaches all over, and his last comment that stuck with me was, you people in the United States that eat organic, even your organic has organic chemicals on it. And I was like, ah, right? So we live in a chemical world, and our body is amazing. It can process so much information and toxicity and emotions and trauma. It can do that. You have everything you need to do that. But does it get overwhelmed at times? Absolutely. Does it build up and create stuck tension, stuck energy? We call that bound energy that doesn't allow it to move through the system. Yeah. And the more distracted we are with our lives out here, the more chance that that's going to happen. So our culture is very predominant that way. That bound energy is what creates that defensive physiology and the distortion all the way out into the cell membrane. So when we're in that bound energy state and we're a different person than if we have unbound energy, when that energy is moving through the system, the physical system, the nervous system, the emotional system, the muscular system, spinal system, organ systems. When that energy is moving through us, it's like we could take a breath, we can relax. And to keep that going for as long as you choose to keep that going for is amazing. All right. Let's look at some of these patterns in network care. So, a couple of things. Has anybody been to a traditional chiropractor, structural adjustment? Okay, cool. So, the chiropractor, typically, when there's bound energy and when the nervous system is overloaded, the spine will subluxate or misalign. It gets stuck. It gets fixed. It does that to protect the nervous system. It's a good thing. Short term, it's a protection of the nervous system. Over the long run, it shuts down that life force to whatever nerves it gives its control to and disconnects information from brain to tissue. The traditional chiropractor will adjust, make an adjustment, put a gentle force in, create oscillation in that part of the spine, and then your body's wisdom sets that vertebrae where it needs to. That's the original philosophy back in the day of D.D. Palmer and B.J. Palmer. The chiropractor, you're not in or out of alignment necessarily, and the chiropractor is not putting you back in place. You're doing it. That oscillation that happens with that force translates into energy, and that fixed area resets. Oscillation is something we see in network care too. We have respiratory waves, we'll talk about that in a little bit, that come through the spine. Oscillation is the movement of things. Every cell of your body, even while you're sitting here, is oscillating. It's moving. And if it's not, because there's bound up energy, it's not a very healthy system. We want to have that oscillation. Oscillation is in all things. The wave is in all things, like your heart, your pulse. There's a wave that comes through there. Your nervous system, the electrical and mental impulses are waves. The tide from the moon, that's a wave. Everything that carries messages happens in the form of wave or oscillation, and they're really looking at this in science now. And Donald Epstein's got a lot of research going too on the oscillation and the wave in network care. So that's what we used to look for, the stuck spot. In network care, we're looking for the rapport, the sweet spot, where you're not stuck, but there's usable energy, unbound energy. And we make the contact there. So there's a connection to it. It's like when you kiss somebody you're so in love with and you just melt. It's that spot. It's when you open that spinal gateway, which I'll explain in a minute, and make that contact and your system goes into okay. The spinal gateway is the area physically, is the area between two vertebrae on the side, typically, between two joints, with a capsule and nerve endings in there, and the nerve endings connect to the nervous system, to the brain, to the organs. That's the physical structure of a spinal gateway. Energetically, there's an energetic area around that spinal gateway physically that allows us to find and feel that rapport. And according to Donald Epstein, it's past, present, future, right there in the present time. So you can access whatever information you need. But that energetic expression is a big part of who you are, as well as the physical. Okay. Entrainment. When I use the word entrainment, the network adjustment, we call it entrainment. We entrain to our soul's rhythm if we allow it. When we become dysregulated, it's hard to connect to that. But entrainment, just to give you some examples, is in all aspects of nature. Birds, you know, the birds that flock and they go in a V. The one that gets them, that's the leader in that moment. If that leader needs to shift, it'll drop down and go to the back, and a new leader comes forward. And they pick up the frequency of that flock and rhythmically move with it. Can you imagine being that in tune to nature? How far have we come? And so there's this rhythm of entrainment. I love the example of women who room together that are in, you know, that age where they're menstruating. They will have their cycles together. Moms and sisters, girlfriends that are living together in the dorm, groups of women, 1 or 2 women, but they will entrain to one another. There's an energetic connection where you pick up on a level that's not conscious, you can't even put it into words, but you just vibrationally, it connects us.